let's talk about Trump's response. Let's do Trump's response quick, okay? Trump has kind of been, he's not been kindly to the Russians past Assad's collapse, even saying that the Russians straight up abandoned Assad and citing Russian casualty data that might or might not be true, but is certainly on the higher echelons of the predictions in his posts about Assad collapsing, as if to imply that the Russians are in a weak geostrategic position in advance of negotiations that are either going on behind the scenes or expected to continue come January if he really does plan to go through with this peace deal and not just abandon the Ukrainians or surge aid, which would be the other two options. Because you certainly cannot just sustain, if he just ended up sustaining the current Biden effort, oh my God, I don't even want to think about that outcome. Anyway, continuing. I wanted to read what Donald Trump said about Assad's collapse because in a month and a half, he will be president of the United States. He will be the one deciding if he pulls troops out of northeastern Syria and abandons the SDF to the Turks to invade, or if he wants to put any pressure on the incoming administration and how the incoming American government is going to be dealing with this new Syria, whatever it might end up looking like. So let's read what Donald Trump, well, first let's actually read JD Vance. Let's get him out of the way before we get any commentary from Trump. As President Trump said, this is not our fight and we should stay out of it. I agree with it 80 to 90%. I think at this point, the Syrians earned it. It certainly wasn't us. We should have no claim to it. But also, we do have troops in northeastern Syria, and Trump wants to claim the victory over ISIS. So he does need to, at the very least, ensure ISIS does not resurge in the rubble. And so that also would include maybe possibly making a deal with the SDF, because if the Turks take over northeastern Syria and invade and conquer it, that's going to be a huge gap in power, which I do believe ISIS will take advantage of, as they're trying to take advantage of the gap in power right now. So there has to be like a balanced withdrawal that measures like fighting fighting against ISIS and making sure we don't abandon our allies and hurt American credibility. Not that I think Trump or JD Vance really care much about American credibility. Aside from that, opinions like the one below make me nervous. The last time this guy was celebrating events in Syria, we saw mass slaughter of Christians and a refugee crisis that destabilized Europe. And he's reacting to a man saying, Syria is free, the rebels won, the people liberated themselves from tyranny, freedom won, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Assad lost, historic, the road ahead for Syria won't be easy, but it'll be better than the past. The world should celebrate Syria's liberation and help it succeed. Ukraine is going to win too. Let's hope it doesn't take 14 years like it did with the Syrians. If we had helped the Syrians more, this would have happened sooner. Let's not make that same mistake with Ukraine now. JD Vance, I do find it interesting that his first statement is not like Assad is dead, good, fantastic, great. His first concern is, well, I don't want Christians to be slaughtered. To be clear, like, Syrians were being slaughtered for the entirety of the civil war by the Assad regime. They were intermittently just bombing Idlib for almost what seemed like shits and giggles for quite a while now, since the situation had stabilized. Hundreds of thousands had died, and many more would die in these prisons. So I understand this concern, but there's not even like there's not even like an effort to pretend that he's like happy. You get what I'm saying? There's not even like an attempt about him going down. It's just, well, the Christians. And I'm not saying that that's not important. It's just that, you know, if Putin was to collapse tomorrow and my only statement was, I hope everything stays stable, it doesn't really feel like you're interested in the same things that I'm interested in. Like, what about it just feels like there's a values difference where JD Vance doesn't really care about like necessarily the humanitarian situation, doesn't really care about like the future of the country itself. It's more just kind of like pointed towards the groups that he cares about, like the Christians. Like, what about the Kurds? Why the Christians specifically? It's because America's full of a lot of Christians. That's not to say they don't matter. It's just that's the reason he's talking about it, because look at his first descriptor on his page, Christian. It's obviously very important for him. Not saying it's the worst statement ever. It's just like a statement of stay out of it. I pray for the Christians. Whatever. Just, I wouldn't even give this much attention outside of the fact that Donald Trump is 78 years old. He will be older than Biden is now at the end of his term, and he's not the healthiest man on the planet. If he dies, this man is president with all of his lack of experience. Here's the one I really wanted to read, Trump's statement. It's the one that's actually interesting. Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin. I like that he says it now as just a turn of phrase, not even related to what he called the Russia hoax, was not interested in protecting him any longer. There was no reason for Russia to be there in the first place. They lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, and with close to 600,000 Russian soldiers lay wounded or dead in a war that should never have started and could go on forever. Now, what's interesting is at first I thought, oh, this must be the Ukrainian total for injured or dead Russian soldiers. But then I remembered that ain't true because I follow those numbers, and that's over 750,000. So this isn't official Ukrainian numbers. So where did he get these numbers from? Is this some secret number that we don't know about? Some like updated casualty data that has not been referenced or published? Is this a number he's just making up on the fly? Or I have no clue. I have no clue. I mean, it's not a number that's impossible, because if you say lay wounded and you include somebody who like loses part of their foot but even goes back into service, like I think you might be actually able to reach this number, but it's impossible to say because I don't have the exact data. But I'm just interesting. Not only interesting because of the number, but also interesting because of the fact that he's mentioning that number in relation to Assad collapsing. Donald Trump is directly connecting Russia's big dedication of resources into Ukraine with Assad's collapse, which I think implies weakness. Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now, and then he directly states the weakness. One, because of Ukraine and a bad economy. The other, because of Israel and its fighting success. This is interesting. This is a big shift to me. To me, this is a big shift because the way he's talked about it up to this point, the way he's talked about Russia up to now was Russia is an unstoppable machine. You know, they beat Napoleon. You know, they beat Hitler. You know, they win wars is how he talked about it. He talked about it with like a very like pseudo historical view because Russia's lost wars. They lost the first invasion of Chechnya, and that was like less than 30, that was like 30 years ago. They lost the Russo-Japanese War. I mean, even though their alliance won World War I, they themselves had to negotiate an agreement and lost World War I. They've lost wars. I mean, they lost the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, if you want to include the Soviet invasion. That was also within this lifetime. So when you talk about Russia in this way, it's an ahistorical way. It's talking about them as the Russian bear. It's talking about them as some unstoppable force. It's talking about them more like a cartoon character and this type of built up imaginary image in your head instead of the actual Russia that exists in the physical world. And so him shifting from talking about Russia like that, which was, I think, a way for him to advocate against continued support for Ukraine and for a settlement, he's now shifting his language to Russia's weakened. Russia's weakened. They lost over 600,000 soldiers. They just got kicked out of Syria. Their economy is bad. This is something I haven't heard from him before. I heard before that he wanted to relieve the sanctions on Russia. And I heard from people around him that, oh, the sanctions didn't work all that much. Now the economy is bad, and the sanctions are certainly hurting the economy. And the other because of Israel and its fighting success. So to me, the way he's talking about Russia now is Russia's lost its soldiers. Russia's lost its allies because they can't defend them. Russia's economy is in the crapper. This is a big shift in rhetoric from Trump from how he was describing the Russians before. Almost as if he stepped into office, or he's about to step in the office. He now actually has to do the job of negotiating. He's no longer just, I need to win. He actually has to care about how the country can negotiate. And now doesn't want to undercut his negotiating position anymore, because the worst deal he gets for the Ukrainians, the worst he could possibly look, he doesn't want to have an Afghanistan crisis on his own hands. If the Russians are demanding that the Ukrainians give up Kramatorsk and Sloviansk and Kherson, a place where the Russians are running a human safari right now, then that's going to make Trump look bad. The mass evacuations are not going to be accepted by the Ukrainians, and it could have a fallout that could have him having his popularity tank like like Biden's did early in his administration because of the Afghanistan withdrawal. It's not the exact same, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, one foreign policy failure like that could definitely have an impact. And when it's smack dab in Europe, that close to NATO, when the vast majority of Americans sympathize with them and we haven't lost a single soldier to provide that support, I don't know, man. I do not know. My point is that I think now he's shifted into a position of wanting to strengthen his negotiating position instead of undercutting continued support for Ukraine. Even if at the same time he's giving interviews like this and he's saying things like, I did promise to, end the war quickly, and they might not receive as much military support under his administration. But it's like might not. Might not? What does might not mean? He's leaving that open to scare the Russians, or while also not trying to go back on his promise to his supporters? Or point is, things are in the air right now. Likewise, Zelensky in Ukraine would like to make a deal and stop the madness. See, now he's talking on behalf of Zelensky. Oh, the Ukrainians want to make a deal. I think the Ukrainians are probably trying to be agreeable right now to Trump to not get on his nerves, try to get the best position out of him. And if negotiations fall through and it wasn't Zelensky said, I was with you since the start, Trump, then Trump would maybe be more willing to be like, okay, let's go win the war Biden lost if negotiations fall through. Who knows? They have ridiculously lost 400,000 soldiers and many more civilians. This is data that is also interesting to me because 400,000 soldiers, the Ukrainian government has reportedly lost like 41,000 soldiers to death and over 100,000, maybe 200,000 soldiers to wounded, if I remember their data they've published. I haven't heard of anything close to 400,000 published by the Ukrainian government. And both for the 600,000 number and 400,000 number, he could just be making up these numbers. And I'm just going to be blunt about it because he's made up these numbers before. Before the war, before he won the election, he was saying it was in the millions. But now it's if you add it all together, like 1 million casualties when he was saying it was millions dead. So these numbers could just be completely contrived, either the 600,000 number or the 400,000 number, or they could be tied to something. It's possible to know. This is why it's hard to try to get information out of Trump. Many more civilians. There should be an immediate ceasefire and negotiations should begin. Too many lives. To be clear, he's saying that there should be a ceasefire right now, and there hasn't been. Others, like, there has been some indication that even before he took office, the guns will stop firing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Simps would say this stuff. It hasn't happened. And just saying that there should be doesn't mean one happens. I'm in Ukraine right now. I'm headed to the front tomorrow. And if you want to support me and going back to the front, because we're going to be filming some pretty active places to document some battles that are taking place, you can go to DylanBurns.tv right now, donate, sub. All your money goes towards the embeds, goes towards covering gas costs, transportation costs. And we've made some, we're doing a lot of traveling towards the end of this trip. So it's getting more expensive as the year goes on because I'm trying to film as much as possible before I go home next week. I am going home next week. Would also be cool to buy some decent Christmas gifts. So you can donate for that, or you can donate to help me buy decent Christmas gifts for my family. Either one. I appreciate it either way. Point is, though, the numbers I don't trust. And the immediate negotiations have not begun. Too many lives are being so needlessly wasted. Too many families destroyed. And if it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir well. This is the time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. At the end, it's just a bunch of, just drum beating, I think. Either way, the way Trump's talking about Russia is now as Russia is weak, Russia is in a weakened position. He's trying to find a way to negotiate from a position of strength. He's going to find difficulty in doing this, though. Because if you are campaigning in your pitches, I'm going to end the war in 24 hours, 24 hours, 24 hours, you didn't give yourself a big window, did you? It's probably why he's trying to find a way to end it now. He's talking about immediate ceasefires, because if he gets in the office, the odds of him starting this in 24 hours, when he gets in the office, is just very low. I think it's a low chance. And I think the Russians, if they think that Trump does not want to go back on his campaign promise, and Trump doesn't want to have his first foreign policy failure immediately by not delivering on his promise, and then the world war gets bigger or spirals in some way, means that he's in a worse negotiating position. But if Trump never said these things, and Trump said, look, I want to get a peace deal, but we're not going to give up X, Y, Z. If he talked about it differently, maybe he'd have more leverage, but he put himself domestically, politically in a worse position to negotiate. Now, This is his second term. He could just ignore that. He just could keep going anyway. It's not like Trump's ever backstabbed anything before, any principle or any promise he's made. I remember when he promised maternity leave on the campaign trail against Hillary to try to outflank her on the issue. But even if, Trump is trying to outflank this, the Russians are going to grab onto it because the Russians want to grab onto any hope that they can scavenge a win from this very costly invasion. Okay. What else do we got? Oh, also, here is Trump talking about a potential peace deal with Putin and how he's not really saying whether he's talked to him yet.
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office. You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been elected?
Burns is an immoral,
well, I don't want to say that.
morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Two folks do rag. Thank you for the tier 1 sub. Beats up for 19 months. What is that? What was that? What was that? You haven't talked to Russia? No. Since you've been elected? Well, so has he? I think he has. I mean, there was that one report that he had that phone call with them and they had like a 30-minute talk about ending the war, but no reports on follow-ups.
You're sworn into office before you're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been elected?
No. Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
But you
I want to
have
stop
talked
it.
about
Let me
the
tell you
other
what I have
world
talked
leaders.
about. Let me tell you.
So we don't really know if he has, but we've got other reports that he has, and the way he answers here makes me think that he has talked to Putin since he's gotten reelected. But the way he's positioning himself outside, at least publicly, is one of, they're weak, we're strong. Even with the way he's undercut himself, it seems that he is still trying to adjust himself somewhat to retain or gain back some leverage. Oh, also in that same interview, Trump also said he can't guarantee that Americans won't actually end up paying more because of tariffs. So congratulations, Trump post-election has finally announced that tariffs will cost you money. Only took, a month and a half left until he's in office. But congratulations, we've accepted the basic reality, the basic economic reality which conservatives used to know about tariffs.